Hello readers, I'm Amy and today I'm going to give you some weird book recommendations. I got this video idea from Kara at Kara Kipland. I was hoping to do this video back in October, but as we all know, October sucked. So, I'm doing it now. I don't know that I'm going to be doing the more traditional end of year videos this year because this year has just been a lot, but this seemed like a fun video to try out and I have some weird book recommendations for you all. So, let's get started with Ring. Did you know that the horror movie Ring was based on a book? Because I didn't. Not that I've ever seen the movie, so I wouldn't have a reason to know that, because I cannot watch that kind of horror movie. I saw the first 2 minutes of it. It freaked me out. I was awake for like days. But my husband took Japanese classes for, was it a minor in college? And he had to read this book and I picked it up. I thought the cover was just awesome. And I'm like, oh, I kind of want to read this. And as I'm getting through it, I'm like, wait, is this supposed to be like the movie? But I can tell you from the first 2 minutes of the movie that it is nothing like the book at all. This is an odd duck of a book. It's part of a trilogy. I think each of the books can stand on their own. I definitely don't recommend picking up books 2 and 3. It's sexist to the point of just, not that sexism isn't already gross and weird, because it is, but it's extraordinarily weird and gross sexism in books 2 and 3, so don't recommend those. It's not too bad in this one. I have some issues with this book, but it's just kind of weird. You have this guy who is talking to a taxi driver, about just all these weird things that are happening, and he goes to investigate it, and he gets this VHS tape that he watches, and it's odd. If you like kind of more paranormal books, you might like this. If you remember the days of good old VHS, you might reminisce a little bit when reading this book. There are some parts of this, specifically I remember there was a part in a restaurant where these two guys go to the restaurant and they order drinks and then they're finishing up their meal. And this all happens within like 2 or 3 sentences while having a conversation. And it was a really odd, I think it has to do with maybe the translation rather than the writing. This might actually be one of the first translated books that I ever read, I think. And translation is a lot when you're reading a book that is not in your own language, or it wasn't initially published in your own language. So, translation is weird, book is weird, but I did thoroughly enjoy this. Next up, Watership Down. I had a friend in high school who was obsessed with this book. She really loved rabbits. She really loved animals. She loved Watership Down. I finally read this, I think last year, and it's weird. It's weird in the way that a lot of personified animal books are weird. I did really like it. Again, a little bit sexist, like needlessly sexist, when it comes to the female bunnies, but you just have these rabbits who are looking for a new location, and I never thought of rabbits as particularly bloody animals, and let me tell you, this book is quite violent, which I think was the weird thing about it, because I'm like, rabbits and blood and tearing each other to pieces? What? And with good world building, I think, you have these odd words or concepts or ideas that you have to learn about as you go through the world, because like this is from a rabbit's perspective. And I don't read a lot of non-human perspectives, I think, at this point. I read quite a few as a kid, but not really as an adult. I don't know that I see it as much as an adult. So it was definitely an odd book for me. I would recommend it though. It's a classic that is worth your time if you don't mind a little bit of bloodshed. Then Stepford Wives. I have a standalone review for this on my channel. I think it's a weird book. It's an odd story that most people have watched the movie for or read the book for, I think, or at least heard of. But famous or not, I'm including it on this list because it is weird. You've got this creepy, like, 1950s town, and you think something weird is going on, and it's not overt. It's not in your face. It's not, these people are creepy and this is what is happening and this is why this person has to escape. It's a very slow burn. You're not entirely sure what is going on. Is this just the community where the women are housewives and don't hold very interesting conversation and don't really care about feminism? Is that just the culture of this place? Or is there something more? Like, it's such a slow burn creepiness. Whenever I watched the 1970s movie, oh, it freaked me out so much. Like, ugh. I get creeped out just thinking about it. If you're very much the feminist, you could easily get freaked out by a book like this. And it's not like a body horror book. It's not a haunted house book. It's like playing mind games. It's a subtle kind of creepiness. And it was so weird, the different ways that you kind of see what's going on, and you're like, but is there anything going on? But there probably is, but is there? Weird book. Short book. Would recommend, but I think you'll definitely be creeped out by it if you don't mind the slow burn. Next up, I have a nonfiction. I have Camgirl here. This was it was weird in that it's not a story that's often told. This is a memoir about a woman who did camming for a time. And you're kind of going through and looking at her different camming experiences, how she got into camming, what it was like for her, kind of the lessons that she learned from it. And it was weird because it goes into so much detail with some of her camming experiences that I'm like, I'm interested in this book, but I'm not sure what point you're trying to get to here. Like, is there something you're trying to tell us, or you're just telling us about camming? And it did eventually get to a point, and I really appreciated that. But definitely weird in that sex work just isn't something that I think people really get to read about very often, and I definitely think that this memoir is worth picking up. I think that Issa? Was it Issa? Was a really good writer. I also watched her movie Cam, which was basically advertised as a movie where the sex worker doesn't die. And it's kind of this horror movie, and it's not like super creepy horror movie. It was a pretty good horror movie. I'm not a huge horror movie person, so I think you'll be okay with watching it. But just weird to see like all of these different experiences with camming, how it was different from maybe more traditional kinds of sex work, what she took out of it. Definitely worth picking up though. Next up, Victoria, from What Victoria Read. This would not be a weird recommendations video without talking about Perfume. I read Perfume a couple of years ago, and then this last year I did a buddy read of it, for me, buddy reread of it with Victoria from What Victoria Read, and she thought it was weird. She thought it was strange, and it is. I loved this book the first time around. It was so... What's the word? It's based around a guy who murders because he's trying to capture the scent of people, and the way that smell is described is just, you can feel it, you can smell these scents in the air. It just, is visceral the word I'm looking for? Words are failing me today, apparently, but she thought it was really weird, and whenever I was reading it the second time around with her and we were talking about it as we read through it, I'm like, this book is a lot stranger than I thought it was the first time around. I mean, I thought it was weird the first time around, especially one of those, the ending scenes, the big group thing. If you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. That was weird. That was not expected in most books. But I loved it anyways. Like, it's a weird, strange book, and as you're reading it you feel like you shouldn't like it, but you do. I mean, if you're me, you liked it even though you didn't feel like you should like it. I think a lot of that comes down to the writing. I would definitely like to try more of Siskin's books. because his writing in this, it's such a weird story, but I was just I was pulled in really easily. It was really easy to get lost in the book, and I could almost read this book in one sitting because it was just, the writing is really there. And with an odd topic like this of a guy who murders because he smells things, you gotta be a good writer to get that point across. Also, recommendation actually from Victoria is Tender is the Flesh. I guess I shouldn't say recommendation. If you are triggered by lots of things, if you're not into the bloody books, if you're not interested in reading about cannibalism, don't pick up this book. Like, this book has a lot of triggers to it, but also I really loved it, and it is really weird. It's kind of this dystopian cannibalism kind of book. I actually put it on my horror shelf because while it is a dystopia, it feels more like horror than it does dystopia. You have this disease that animals have gotten, so animal flesh is no longer edible for humans, and people make up for that by by kind of designating certain people as edible and by raising them as edible, so they no longer really have a language or a culture or society. They're seen as others. I think that could also really be a comment on race for this book, a comment on society, a commentary on the meat industry. The stuff that goes on in this book is weird, but again, it was a book that I almost read this in one sitting. I was just hooked. The writing is great. The translation, this is a Argentina author, so original language was Spanish, and translation is very good. The writing outside of the translation seems to be very, very good. The story has so many points to make. I also like that it has fairly short, digestible chapters. Short chapters do so much for a good book, and actually a couple of these. I know Stepford Wives, Camgirl, and Tender is the Flesh all had really short chapters. So again, makes it more of a digestible read. Perfume actually had some longer chapters, but I loved it anyways, which is interesting. Last two weird book recommendations are nonfiction from a fairly popular nonfiction author, and that's going to be Mary Roach. Really, anything Mary Roach writes is weird and funny and just would recommend. I found there are some people who don't like her, and I think she has a very particular sense of humor that you either will or won't love. I love it. She doesn't have any one particular study. She just grabs onto this topic, learns about it, researches it, does a book on it. She's got a book on sex. She's got a book on ghosts. She has a book on the digestive system. And these two are going to be my top weird recommendations for her. Like, she talks about so many odd topics with her nonfiction, but these two, I think, really kind of drive home her kind of research, because you have Grunt and Packing for Mars. Packing for Mars is about how you get by in space as an astronaut, essentially, how you prepare for Mars or the moon or wherever you're going to. And Grunt is about war, essentially. But Packing for Mars, she has this whole chapter on how do you poop in space? How do you use the bathroom when, like, gravity is kind of an issue and when you're eating a very strict sort of diet? And then Grunt, it's not just research on war, it's what type of fabric is used for military outfits and why. These are questions that I never thought that I had, and in reading about them, I'm like, that is a really good question. I wonder how that would turn out. I wonder why they do A, B, and C. And she answers those. These two definitely, I think, have some of the weirdest questions for me. I think a lot of people would probably think Bonk, her book on sex, was the weirdest, but having done a lot of sex education work in college, that book just isn't that weird to me. So that is going to be it for my little stack of weird book recommendations. Thank you, Care from Cara Kipland, for doing the original video, because I thought that was awesome. And you don't have people talking about a lot of weird books, I think, with BookTube. So, hope you like this video. Check out Care's video, which I will link down below. Please like, subscribe, be my friend on social media. I will see all of you in my next video. Bye, friends.